Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the November 28, 2017 Poudre School District Board of Education meeting. We have an exciting meeting lined up for you tonight, but first we're going to do approval of the agenda. Would anybody like to make any motions to change the agenda? David?
I move that we add an item, a statement in support of fully funding IDEA, and I think it's an action item from the legislative committee.
Great, thank you very much. Let's add that after work session topics 7.0, so we'll create action items 8.0, and statement in support of fully funding IDEA will be 8.1, moving 8 to 9 and 9 to 10. So that'll happen later this evening. In the meantime, community comment. Could somebody hand me the...
You need a second.
Oh, I'm sorry, we do need to second it. Thank you. Second. Who would like to second that?
Second.
Second, Nate. Okay, roll call.
Nate?
Yes.
Christoph?
Aye.
Susan? Aye. Kathy?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
Carolyn?
Aye.
And David?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it's all good. So next up we have 3.0 community comment. We have one person signed up to speak. Mr. Sutherland?
Eric Sutherland, citizen of Fort Collins, father of a Poudre School District, sophomore, taxpayer in the Poudre School District. Wanted to begin by saying that your discussion of school finance as it came about in the forum that was held to state legislators present was thin on the solution set. Incredibly thin. There are solutions out there that are not receiving the time of day. Nobody seems to want to hear about them. And to focus exclusively on the problems time and time again, which seems to be the modus operandi of this organization, is not going to get you anywhere. You got to start looking at solutions. They're out there. Now, the main topic of my comments this evening is really just focuses on the abhorrent dishonesty that has attended the long-range plan from the time it was announced through the litigation. It is a mistake to rely upon the parochialism of the 8th District Court when submitting imprudent and unjustifiable requests to the court. It also sets a really bad example for the entire PSD community to make false statements to a court, to have an action that was properly brought before the court dismissed. And this, of course, is the only reason that you can't sell bonds, whether I fall off the face of the earth tomorrow or not, as I've told you many times. Fortunately, we do have appellate courts, and they follow the law down there in Denver, not influenced by any local issues. I'm just deeply disturbed by the example that has been set by the Poudre School District, by Superintendent Sandra Smizer, to the effect that it is okay to go to a court of law and make false statements, to manipulate a judicial proceeding, to manipulate an election, and think it's going to get you anywhere. I'll be quite honest. I would not have appealed the decision of Judge Devin Odell in the declaratory judgment action against me, save for the extraordinary disregard for rule of law that that decision had. No determination of the courts in the actions that you have brought is going to make any difference whatsoever in the ability of the school district to attract the investors to purchase its bonds. Not with an underlying failure of due process, mucking it up and eroding any confidence that any investor might have in purchasing those bonds, period. So, I was actually kind of conflicted in that whole thing. I see the amount of time, a lot of subject material. I do hope that there are some changes around here.
Does anybody wish to make community comment who didn't have the opportunity to sign up? Okay, then we have our David Trask, who is our retiring District C Director on the Board of Education, is going to make a few comments as kind of our community comment.
Thank you. I saw Wayne waving back. I thought you were working to speak or you're looking for... I just want to do two things here this evening. One is to make a one-page statement, and then the other is basically to go through and somewhat repeat what we did out during the reception and just thank different groups of people for all that they do and the pleasure of working with all of these fine folks. So let me start with a written statement. The Board of Education seated before you continues Colorado's long tradition of public education. American land policy defined the terms of settlement in our state by setting aside 2 sections of land in each township to support education. In 1862, the Morrill Act granted federally controlled land to states to help finance land-grant colleges dedicated to practical research and highly skilled jobs. Building on this tradition, the Colorado Constitution of 1876 established local school boards to oversee public education in each locale. Although we follow this long tradition of public education, PSD and most everyone else does not continue the goals and methods of the schools portrayed in the Little House on the Prairie television drama of yesteryear. We don't rely on chalk slates and McGuffey readers. Choice is central to what we do. Today's PSD offers students a wide range of curricular choices, including STEM, dual language immersion, international baccalaureate, core knowledge, hands-on learning, and online instruction. These approaches all operate within the framework of Colorado's rigorous educational standards and operate directly under the PSD Board of Education. Parents can access our smorgasbord of choices in several ways. New arrivals can choose where to live based on what school they want their children to attend. Long-established residents can choose to send their kids to their neighborhood school with their classmates, or with their playmates, or they can seek via lottery to enter one of our public programs they feel better tailored to the interests and learning approaches of their child. The PSD board provides parents with this range of choice. The national mantra that choice means charter as a prerequisite for people seeking educational choice does not apply here. Although choice in PSD does not require charter schools, PSD currently contains 7 charter schools, which in many cases duplicate our offerings while providing unique approaches to some others. 4 are under the indirect supervision of this board, while 3 others are overseen at the state level. The district remains open to charter schools, especially when they enhance student choices. There is, however, an underlying tension between the enactment of choice and the district's goal of equity that must be addressed. Equity is essential to any district seeking to educate every child every day. We want to enhance the academic growth of all students, regardless of their social backgrounds and capabilities. Although charters and PSD both use a lottery system to select new students, only charters require an individual interview prior to entering the lottery. There is community suspicion that some prospective charter parents hear a discouraging description of the charter experience at the pre-lottery meeting, while those from other social backgrounds receive a warm and inviting commentary. If true, the management of the charter school charter choice selection process can lead directly to a student body which in no way approximates the demographic makeup of the district. Some segments of PSD's overall student population comprise the vast majority of enrollees at some charter schools, while other groups of students are not present within those walls at all. If these concerns are accurate, the result could be a district of segregated charter schools which publicly stoke animosity toward truly public schools to boost their own enrollment. For example, consider the pronouncements by some charter officials that their own uncredentialed but presumably motivated faculty offers a superior education to that presented by people who have prepared for their profession over a number of years. This is not the language of partnership in a shared endeavor. It is a form of slander. Recent board minutes from one charter suggest a new willingness to explore ways to collaborate more effectively with all schools. That would be a good beginning. Educating all children for rewarding adult lives is already the goal of PSD. Takes care of that.
Thank you, David, and thank you very much for your 4 years of service on the school board. I know we all appreciate the time that you have spent with us.
Thank
Thank you, sir.
I just want to add, I just want to applaud all the groups represented in the room. This has been a wonderful experience. We have great parents. We have supportive taxpayers. We have great personnel in PSD. We have a great board, and it's a good board in the sense that people come in and discuss issues. They don't come in with an agenda as in, I'm going to make this board make this decision tonight. Something like we avoid some of those pressures that come out of some other districts that we've seen around the state. And so it's been a pleasure for me to do this work for these reasons. I want to single out 4 people to thank just very briefly. The first person I met when I came in here, and as recently as this evening, almost the last person I saw is Tessa Oppenheimer, who directs everything and in a very polite way tells people where to go. And she's the traffic cop and maybe even some of the glue. I don't know. Secondly, I want to thank all of the PSD people in a board meeting. When we're sitting up there, you can look out behind us here and see the full cabinet. And those, I think it's 9 people collectively, are responsible for all the employees, all of the work going on in the district, all the good things that are happening. And that is a group that I want to thank because I've enjoyed working with all of you. Beyond that, I want to also, after Tessa, I want to thank Sandra. She's the only school superintendent I've known since I was in the 7th grade, and the superintendent lived across the street. So I think she's a great role model for what can be done. I think her heart is in the right place. I think her vision is broad and long range, and I've appreciated working with her. And I'd like to thank Kathy. I've been vice president to her presidency for the last 2 years. And I think it's very seldom that I've seen a person who works that constantly and that competently over a whole broad range of issues. And I think she's been a very important reason for our success on this board, which is almost universally recognized. And finally, I want to thank my wife, Suzanne, sitting back over there in the corner. At a very key moment in the process of should I run or not, she made a very strategic, soft statement to me, and that kind of tipped the balance over in the direction of being sure to run. And she's, I think, a major force organizing political events here in the community. And I've been kind of on the fringe of those the last 4 years, and I'm looking forward to getting back involved with that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Again. Okay, that means that we are up to 4.0 on the consent agenda, and I'm looking for a motion to approve and adopt it.
I'll move.
Nate.
I move that the board approve and adopt the recommended actions for the items on the consent agenda.
A second, please. Really? Oh, Christoph, okay. Okay, roll call, please.
Nate,
Yes.
Christoph,
Aye.
Susan. Aye. Kathy,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
Carolyn,
Aye.
David. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. That brings us to item 5, which is oath of office. And 5.1, okay, 5.1 is oath of office. You know what? Nobody left me a cheat sheet up here to say in what order we're going to do this. The people who ran for re-election to the board will also get sworn in. And I think what we should do is in order of district. And I believe C comes first. You guys are E, Carolyn, and F, Christoph, right? D and E. Okay, so we will do first Kristen, and then Christoph, and then Carolyn, if that works. Does that work for you, Judge French? Okay, you may take your place at the podium. Thank you, sir. And we would like to also spend a moment thanking Judge French, who comes back every 2 years and swears in new school board members. We really appreciate that you are with us every 2 years and that you take the time to do this for us.
Thank you. Let me say briefly, I'm a big fan of PSD. I graduated from the high school across the parking lot 50 years ago. My wife graduated from Poudre High School. We had 2 sons who went to 13 years of school in Poudre School District. I have sisters-in-laws and a brother-in-law and lots of family members who were teachers, and so we are big fans of what you do. Thank you, all of you, for what you do. Sincerely, thank you.
And thank you for
Draper.
French Field.
Of course. Ms. Draper, if you'd raise your right hand, please. I, Kristen Draper,
I, Kristen Draper,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully perform
that I will faithfully perform
the duties of the office of school director
the duties of the office of school director
as required by law,
as required by law,
and will support the Constitution of the United States,
and will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Colorado,
the Constitution of the State of Colorado,
and the laws made pursuant thereto.
and the laws made pursuant thereto.
Congratulations. Thank you for your
Thank
service.
you.
Congratulations, Director Draper, if you would take your seat.
And then did you say Ms. Reed next or Mr. Fev?
Mr. Febb.
Thank you. Mr. Fev, if you'd raise your right hand, please. I, Christophe Fev,
I, Christophe Fev,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully perform
that I will faithfully perform
the duties of the office of school director
the duties of the office of school director
as required by law,
as required by law,
and will support the Constitution of the United States,
and will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Colorado,
the Constitution of the State of Colorado,
and the laws made pursuant thereto.
and the laws made pursuant thereto.
Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you for your service.
Thank you very much.
So, if you'd raise your right hand, thank you. I, Carolyn Reed,
I, Carolyn Reed,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully perform
that I will faithfully perform
the duties of the office of school director
the duties of the office of school director
as required by law,
as required by law,
and will support the Constitution of the United States,
and will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Colorado,
the Constitution of the State of Colorado,
and the laws made pursuant thereto.
and the laws made pursuant thereto.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you for your service.
Thank you again, Judge French, for coming and joining us for that twice, every other year event. Okay, on to 6, organization of the board and election of officers. So what happens after every election where we have new board members? We also have a new board, which means we elect new officers. And the first question we ask under that is, first, do board directors wish to do election by secret ballot? And I have been informed that at least one board member wishes to do this. So is that agreeable to the rest of the board, or would the board like to take a vote on this? Is it required? Okay.
Yeah, it needs to be
Okay.
roll
Would
call
somebody
vote.
like to make a motion then?
I would move that we elect the board president and vice president by secret ballot.
Okay, do we have a
Or
second?
maybe, do we have to do 2 votes or just
I
1?
think one's adequate. I think
One will
one.
do it? Okay, I
Would
move.
somebody like to second that? Susan? Okay, go ahead, roll call.
Nate,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Christophe,
Aye.
Susan. Aye. Kathy,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
Aye.
motion passes 7-0.
Okay, next up, we have nominations for president. So are there any nominations for the position of president of the board? Carolyn?
I nominate for the office of board president Christophe Febre.
Okay.
Second.
Second by Nate. Okay. Are there any other nominations? Okay. Since seeing no other nominations, is the board willing to do acceptance of Christophe as president by acclamation?
Technically, before you do that, Mr. Favor needs to indicate
Oh.
whether he accepts the nomination.
I'm sorry, Christophe. Director Feb, would you like to accept the nomination?
I do accept.
Okay, now that he is formally accepted, seeing no other nominations. Nate?
I wondered if Director Fev had a nomination speech prepared.
Mr. Donovan, you did make me aware that you would ask that question, but I must admit I did not prepare one. If you would like me to speak, I'm happy to.
Okay. If nobody's requiring a speech of Mr. Feb, is it acceptable to the board that if we elect him by acclamation? Everybody can say yes or no or yay. Okay.
Yes.
No objections? Okay. Excellent. Well, congratulations, President Feb. I think it is time for you and I to switch seats.
Okay. So here we go. I'm gonna start in this position. My very first words really do have to be for Kathy. I know this is a night of thank yous, but Kathy, the work you've done for this board, first, you know, as a member, and a member who was so gracious to those of us coming on the board, working hard, followed by working as the vice president and providing excellent guidance when Tom was the president, and then finally as president, showing us how to constantly be inclusive as a board, which is something I really always appreciate about you, and also bringing our community always into what we do is something you've done. And while not wanting to go through the list of your accomplishments, I also wanted to acknowledge the amazing work that's going to come to fruition again tonight as we meet with our legislators and kind of taking this board and creating a stature around how we work beyond ourselves into our legislature. I would really like to take my first words to say thank you and ask that the rest of us give her a really big round of applause. So, this is an odd position to be in. I have no idea really how it works. I spent some time looking at old meetings, but here we go, jumping in. I think the next order of action would be electing the vice president. So at this point, I would take nominations for vice president. Kathy.
I'd like to nominate Susan Gutowski.
Do I have a second for that? Okay. Any other nominations?
I nominate Rob Pedersen for the office of vice president.
Okay, and can I get a second for that?
Second.
Okay, so we have two candidates. Any more nominations? All right. Does anybody want to speak about the positions? Or provide some insight?
I believe
Okay.
they both have to accept the nomination now.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
That's okay.
Well, I accept the nomination.
I accept the nomination. I would let Rob go first with his
Rob?
speech to us.
Okay.
Okay, I'm willing to do that. So I've prepared some notes here for myself, so if I look down, but in thinking about this, I've tried to think about what does the vice president do? I mean, what's the point of the role, right? The most obvious thing, and I guess the only thing that's written down, if I really firmly, is that, you run the meeting if the president isn't there. Okay, so that's fine. I think there's also the important part about partnering with the president and the superintendent on setting agendas. That's a really key thing, and I'll refer to that again later on in my comments here. I think there's also the part about partnering with the president on communication to and from the board. There's a communication element that I think is really critical. And I guess philosophically where I'm coming from is a place of what would be called servant leadership, I think, which is basically working with the president and the rest of the board to ensure the success of the board activities on behalf of the district and really in the end on behalf of the students, right? So it's really what can the person in this role do to help make that successful. So in terms of what I bring, right, I have a pretty deep knowledge about what's going on based on my years of volunteering and also my experience on the board and a sort of heavy curiosity. I have excellent relationships with a lot of people in the system, and they feel comfortable talking with me and discussing issues with me. I'm connected most of the time with email and what's going on, so I know what's going on, and if I don't, I ask. And I'm always prepared for the meetings. I have time to spend on the board activities and support Christoph. I know Christoph is a full-time worker. I have the luxury, I guess, of being retired, and this is really my focus and my passion to support the education here. I'm willing to dig into issues of interest to the board. For example, we've seen that through the superintendent's evaluation subcommittee and the community engagement subcommittee and community outreach subcommittee, and the work that came to fruition in the meeting with Holy Family, for example, last year, in terms of reaching out to the community. And as you all know and sometimes make fun of, and I get it, is I'm willing to ask a lot of probing questions of the system and the superintendent. And I hope everybody knows that I do that for the benefit, what I hope is the benefit of the system as a whole and in the end, the students. So I've demonstrated all this stuff since I've been on the board, and you could say, well, that's all swell. You can do that as a regular board member, and I have done it as a regular board member. But I think the other piece about it is that it's a key. Many of those things are key things for leadership as well, because when the vice president and the president sit with the superintendent in agenda setting in particular, and any other kind of leadership meetings that they need to be in, having that deep knowledge, having those connections, having that time to dig into issues and things can help to make those meetings more productive on behalf of the board as a whole, I think. I also have thought through some ideas for improvement, I think, of how the board might operate. I think we have a board calendar for the next, 6-8 months, whatever it is, goes through the end of the school year at least, with some things that are in the parking lot, right? I think it'd be a good idea for the board leadership to reach out to each of the individual members to understand what it is they're expecting from each of those topics. And the reason I say that is because we have had some, what I would call misses in the past, where there have been certain expectations that individual board members had of what was going to happen, and then it didn't happen that way. And that leads to frustration on the part of the board members, but also frustration on the part of the cabinet members and whatnot who prepare something that turns out not what was wanted, right? And they do a lot of work on behalf of the board, so we need to make sure that it's productive. I think we've had situations where we don't know, where some members of the board anyway don't know what certain executive sessions are and special meetings are in advance of being asked to schedule them, or in advance, in some cases in advance of actually showing up at the meeting. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think we want to make sure that there's good communication around that. So you'll notice a theme here of communication that I'd like to enhance. Again, to the extent that board agenda items are moved from one place to another on the board calendar, I'd like to make sure that that's communicated effectively and that people know what's going on and why. And I would commit personally to doing board updates after every agenda setting meeting with Sandra or leadership, so that everybody is on board. Two things that don't specifically that have to do with my where I sit in terms of elections and things. And that is that I have the potential to be reelected, right? I mean, it's up to the voters, obviously. But to the extent that I do get reelected, being in a vice presidential position now gives me some opportunity for training for a potential presidency if I get reelected and the board at that time chooses me for that role. And secondly, it allows the potential, if that happens, also to have continuity of leadership in the meetings and whatnot with the superintendent, assuming everything stays the same, right? So those are some thoughts. I know it was a little long-winded, but I wanted to give you the insights that I can to help with the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And I think, Susan, do you want to just go ahead and, all right.
I prepared some thoughts too, and I might tend to read a little bit more than just speak to you. I think I'd rather get my thoughts and express them clearly from a lot of the thought that I gave to what I'd like to tell you. And I'd like to tell you about me. I'd like to have you get to know me just a little bit better. I started my career with PSD in 1979 as a middle school teacher. 3 middle schools later, in 28 years of service, I retired. But I wasn't ready to quit the classroom. I really missed the kids. So I subbed at Kennard for 6 years until I ran for the PSD Board of Education. I've served as a director for 6 years. In total, I've had the honor to serve the district for almost 40 years. And now I'm seeking the opportunity to spend my last 2 years assisting our new president by doing the work of vice president of the board. I feel I'm personally and professionally suited for this position, as I have the experience and in-depth knowledge to help set the agenda and guide the direction of the district. I'm proud of the work that I've done during my last 6 years on the board. It's given me the opportunity to develop a set of beliefs that have guided my work and that I feel will serve me well as vice president. First, I believe an educator's voice should always be present on the board, and if possible, as a member of the leadership team. I bring more than 3 decades of first-hand experience to this position, and I think that my years of working with children have trained me to be more of a listener and less of a talker, a crucial qualification for being an effective leader. Next, I believe that effective school boards focus on the ends rather than the means. It is our job to monitor the work of our staff rather than to do the work of our staff, and to provide continuous positive support for their efforts to achieve our district goals. I believe that an effective school board fosters relationships. During my 6 years on the board, I've enjoyed working with our superintendent and getting to know the wonderful people in central office and learning what they do to meet the needs of everyone in PSD. I have a deep admiration for their work, just as I do for those who greet our kids every day in our schools. In addition, though, I've had the pleasure of working with our community groups who support our work. I served on the board for Project Smile, who were recently recognized for the work that they do to ensure that dental and vision care is provided to students who might otherwise not be able to afford it. I'm currently serving on the PSD Foundation Board, and I chair the committee that puts on the annual Excellence in Education Awards night for our teachers. The foundation works very hard to supplement our ever-dwindling instructional budget by providing financial resources for our classroom teachers. Finally, I need to mention the board that is near and dear to my heart, the Museo de Tres Colonias. In September, we celebrated the re-grand opening of this community treasure that represents the neighborhoods of Buckingham, Alta Vista, and Andersonville. We've partnered with CSU and Fort Collins High School to transform the museo into a PSD resource to help our students understand and celebrate the Hispanic culture and lifestyle in Fort Collins during the early years of the sugar beet industry. I hope you, my esteemed colleagues, will appreciate my qualifications and my sincere desire to serve our board as your vice president.
Excellent. I think I will ask if anybody has any questions of these two folks, just to give that an opportunity. Okay? Short of that, thank you. Incredible. The best thing I can say is that that's a tough choice. So with that, I think we open it up and we'll do a secret ballot is what we have. So.
Yes, I'll pass out the ballots. After I pass them out, board members should write in the name of the candidate they're voting for, fold the ballot in half, and Kyla will collect them, bring them to me, I'll tally them, and announce the result. The results of the election are that Susan got 4 votes and Rob got 3, so Susan is elected the vice president.
Thank you.
Betrayed.
Oh, that's right, betrayed. That's why you say, just keep moving down. Yeah, we're moving down.
Until the music stops.
This is your stuff.
All right. That brings us, that's the conclusion of the organization of the board, item 6.1, election of officers. So tonight, the next item is 7.1, and we have a discussion with our elected officials, both state and federal. And Kathy has recommended we take a 5-minute break and we'll get organized and we'll reconvene. How's that? Everybody can take a breath. So. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'll give everybody a second to get seated. So on to agenda item 7. This is our annual, what's become a bit of a tradition, our annual work session where we have a discussion with our legislators. And I want all of you to know that we value this almost above all our other meetings. We find it very productive. The ability to sit together, have a bit of a conversation with all of you. It's not that we expect to change the world. We just hope to create a nice relationship, learn a lot mutually, and create words that common dialogue and see where it leads. So I would suggest, why don't we start with Ann and work from left to right and just give you each an opportunity to introduce yourselves. Let us know what your position is, what you're working on, and if, just a brief idea if there's anything towards education that you're working on. And then once we've gone around once, then we can open it up and let the discussion begin.
Good evening. I'm Ann Barkus. I'm the contract lobbyist for the Poudre School District, and I'm really just here to sort of listen to the dialogue because I'm going to be representing the school district down at the state capitol during session.
My name is Kim Redd, and I am with Congressman Jared Polis's office. I am his district representative and education advocate. So I work with Congressman Polis on education issues on a federal level, and I'm here tonight to help answer some questions about what's going on a federal level, and also to let you know that he is going to put forth a bill next week around IDEA and full funding of that, and I will pass out some information about that soon. And what I want to get across this evening is really that we do need to hear from you. I am a constituent advocate. I need to know what the concerns are on a district level, on a school level, what are the students, what are the parents concerned about, and help inform Congressman Polis as he develops legislation on a federal level and advocates for his constituents in this district. So I'm here tonight to also find out what your concerns are, and hopefully I'll be able to give you some ideas of what he's been doing over the last year around education as well.
Thanks. This is also one of my favorite nights. I want to start with congratulations to the new chair and vice chair and to the whole school board, and congratulations to Kristen for being new school board member. And thank you for Kathy for her past work. All of you, how much time and dedication and community commitment, and I see you everywhere, and you don't get paid a cent, and you just keep going. So, and really, that's the first thing. The second thing is how much your voice means at the Capitol and how important it is for us to know that. And you've really made a big splash down there, and because of your advocacy and hiring an excellent lobbyist is a really good step. City of Fort Collins has also done that. I'm super excited. We're having a much bigger voice at the Capitol. When we take votes, we know your position. We're elected to represent our hometown and your position. And so even when we vote against the party lines, we're able to say, hey, I'm voting for my district. I'm representing what our elected officials do. And that just means the world to me. And it also makes me feel not so alone. Very lonely. I think most of you know my background. I'm a Fort Collins native. I'm actually a precinct native, live at City Park. Christoph and I went to high school together. It's a little background. I went to Moore Blevins and Poudre. And then I grew up and went away for 24 years and became a special ed teacher, and then got a PhD in literacy and language at Purdue with you, one floor away from you. And then was eventually department head of special education literacy teacher preparation. So my expertise is in evaluation, assessment, and teacher preparation. None of which I use at the Capitol that much, as I'm chair of the Ag, Natural Resources, and Livestock Committee. I do use it. The ed bills I follow extremely closely, and I lose a molar every time that these things come through. Those are very emotional bills for me, just with my background in the disability community. I feel very passionately, and I feel very lucky to be so in sync with the school board and the way our school district is run. I don't think we've clashed on a single position or bill ever. Oh, maybe that one social studies bill, whatever. But when you guys come down to the Capitol and we hear from you, it just couldn't be more important. So I'm looking forward to partnering with you again. And I pledge every year to run one pro-district teacher bill, and we get 5 bills a year, and I have my spot wide open. So.
Okay. I just want to thank you all for the invitation. It is one of the highlights that I get to learn a lot in what's going on in the Poudre School District. And I do thank all of you for all the time that you put in to working hard to make the school district very good. I sit on agriculture and transportation, so I learned a lot from your wonderful lobbyist, Ann, and was able to carry a bill, worked closely with Kathy Kipp, and that was a real honor. And all of those relationships are huge down there in the Capitol, and I look forward to building them also with the new president and learning more about the direction Poudre School District is going. I have to say my mother was on the school board for 8 years, and so I learned a lot even from her, from the discussions she was having. But my district is all of Larimer County except for the city of Loveland and except for the city of Fort Collins, but it includes the township of Windsor. And I am a 3rd-generation Weld County kid, grew up with agriculture, and I'm just honored to join you here tonight.
Good evening. My name is John Kafalas, Senate District 14, State Senator, which is most of the city of Fort Collins. I'm also happy to be here. I look forward to the exchange of ideas, dialogue. I'm happy to answer questions regarding committees that I serve on, regarding bills that I'm considering that might directly or indirectly have bearing on the children that we teach. Some things you may not know about me. One is, of course, that I've lived in this community for over 40 years. Both of my kids graduated from Poudre School District and have done very well. My older son, who's in the military, was in the first graduating IB graduating class at the school up the hill, and 1998, I believe that was. So my kids have done well here. I actually have a Master's of Art in Teaching, Secondary Science Education, and I have been a teacher in the classroom, mostly up here as a substitute teacher, so I've been to many of the schools. I care a lot about education. I care a lot about early childhood development, preschool, and I also teach part-time at CSU, part-time faculty, adjunct faculty member. I teach public policy analysis, and again, I look forward to working together on the issues that we care about and that matter to the children and the families that we serve. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Angelica Schroeder. I am currently the chair of the State Board of Education. Thank you for the invitation to join all of you this evening. The role of the State Board is a little bit different than your role, and it's a little bit different than their role. Sometimes I kind of feel like I'm in between. I did serve 8 years on my own school board. I represent the 2nd Congressional District, which is 14 school districts. I don't want to diminish you all, but I sure do have I think, a wonderful variety of school districts that I represent, from very, very small to very large. I represent a part of Jeffco. I think it's given me an interesting perspective on what is really the effect of legislation, because it affects districts so differently. Nevertheless, I've represented a district, or was served on a board, a district similar to this one, so I understand that information intimately. I'm here to answer questions. I can talk, if you wish, a little bit briefly about where the State Board is going in the next, we think we're going in the next year, barring any big surprises. Thank you.
Hi. James Thompson, Regional Director for Senator Michael Bennet, and thank you. I'm glad to be back here again. I'm Regional Director for Northern and Northeastern Colorado, so my counties, 11 counties, include Larimer County, Weld, Boulder County, the northeastern counties, and actually Clear Creek and Gilpin counties too, so I'm sure you're familiar with those. And actually, this is the only district that we, as an office in my region, get invited to something like this. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to hear your input. As you probably know, and I've probably repeated before, Senator Bennet is a former superintendent of Denver Public Schools. So he likes to say he knows what it's like to be on the receiving end of Washington policy when it comes to education. He is on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee as well. And again, as you know, we were able to get legislation in the previous Congress to pass the Every Child Achieves Act, and of course continue to work on educational issues, higher ed included as well. Currently, he also sits on the Finance Committee, so really kind of right in front of us right now is this tax legislation, which does have an impact on families who are raising kids in the school district, has an impact on students who are either in college or looking to go to college in terms of the student, the student loan tax deduction. So there are a number of things that affect education that aren't specifically what we think of as education policy that will be affecting families in your district, as well as, well, I guess I would just say Senator Bennet has also proposed a doubling, or actually a tripling of the child tax credit as well. That's not necessarily likely to go through, but Senator Bennet recognizes the need for families to have more tax relief when it comes to being able to raise their families and be able to work. So either way, I guess I'm here to listen, so I'm just going to move on. I know that I appreciate that Nate and Kathy, again, thanks to your service as president, came to visit me, I would say less than a month ago, and I think that at the top was IDEA, and I know that Senator Bennet does support the funding of that, but why don't I'll just end it and go to get input.
Okay. What we'd like to have is just a dialogue, and I would like to commend this board for having a legislative subcommittee that works really hard. And in that regard, I know that I think most of you have sat with us, 2 board members at a time, and seen our agenda. But I think what we can do is just open it up and see what questions board members have, or vice versa. So I'll take any comments or questions at this point. Kathy.
Actually, Angelica and I had a chance to meet in October, wasn't it, Angelica? Just a few weeks ago. And I know we had some conversation about a topic that's been of huge interest here in the district, and a little bit of confusion, I think, about the infield and out of field and all of that. And I was wondering if you might have had a chance to get some more information to maybe clarify some of that information for the board on teacher levels and certifications and all that.
So this is an area that I think we're going to continue to look at, but for the submission of the ESSA plan, it was necessary for us to identify what is considered an in-field teacher for purposes of equity, of ensuring that all kids have an equal shot at having a highly qualified teacher. Since we no longer have that definition, highly qualified, it's moved to in-field and out-of-field. I think it's still, right now, I can't remember exactly the number of hours. It's a little bit more than a minor and not as much as required for a state license. I think we're going to continue to look at that, and I think we took a pass on spending a whole lot of time in terms of the licensure piece. But One of the statistics I was made aware of in reading a paper that is co-authored by Linda Darling-Hammond, who's one of the gurus in teacher quality, is that Colorado has the second highest, second only to DC, of uncertified teachers. And it sort of made me think that we need to look at this more carefully. I think school districts would like to have the freedom to hire anyone they think is qualified, and there are certainly examples of folks who are unlicensed who may in fact be very qualified to teach. But in terms of ESSA, it's about equity, just about looking at the different teachers within a school and seeing how they are assigned to high-achieving or at-risk students. The bigger issue, I think, is for Colorado to come up with some understanding of the needs of licensure. What are some of the other characteristics? Highly qualified, I think if you remember that, was actually minimally qualified to be a teacher. And so that was a misnomer, and we haven't, I think the board's going to take that up. It's a little on the controversial side, simply because there are folks who don't believe in licensing at all, to a notion of there isn't anything more important than a highly qualified teacher. And the license is sort of a symbol of what that is. It may not be a guarantee. I think it's helpful to note that given the discussions about teacher shortages, that none of the recommendations that have come forward have talked about lowering the bar for getting teachers into the classroom. There are all sorts of efforts to support teachers, to come up with some new ways to train teachers, but they don't suggest let's have unlicensed, unprepared teachers, for which I am very thankful.
Well, if I could just follow up, I guess one of the concerns in our district is that the hours have moved from 24 hours to 36 hours, and given that we have a teacher shortage in Colorado, we're kind of concerned, because then some of our teachers, I believe, when they come back up for renewal, is that it, Vicki? And you can feel free to add what I'm missing. Or do you want to? That we're concerned that we're going to be even more short of teachers. Did you want to add to that, Vicki?
What does the 24 to 36 hours refer to?
Under No Child Left Behind, in order to be highly qualified, there were several criteria. You could have a degree, an endorsement, or 24 semester credits in that area. And that went from 24 to 36 under ESSA. So.
Anyway, if the State Board of Education could hopefully consider that as you're continuing your deliberations.
I think we'll continue our deliberations, but I think I'm trying to make the point that it's our intention to provide lots of ways for folks to get the training, more so than to be backing off. I'm not going to sit here and promise you that we're going to go back. Highly qualified was not highly qualified. It was considered minimally qualified. And that's really partly for that test. It's not really going to raise the bar in Colorado in terms of student achievement if we're not very, very careful in how we hire our teachers. If we have teachers getting renewals every so often, that's a way to come to that point. The other thing I want to remind you of is we have tons of exceptions in Colorado, which is why we probably have the highest level of uncertified teachers in the state. So there are ways for districts to work around with the intention that teachers raise their proficiency over time to become fully certified.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I should, sorry, I just wanted to add, you know, what we hear in terms of feedback for education policy, you know, what is working in ESSA, and I did call it Every Child Achieves Early. That was a Senate version of it, so it changed.
I didn't recognize
that. But essentially, you know, what we want to hear is, you know, we're going to come back at this again, right? So what is working in implementation? What is working, you know, as we, you know, go through with this? So, and what's not, of course.
Go right ahead. Oh, okay. I thought you had another question. Another board member want to? Okay. I know I'd be interested to hear from Ms. Redd something about the IDEA legislation that you're looking at.
I wanted also to thank you for inviting us here this evening, and Congressman Polis would be here, but he's in Washington and working on a lot of different things. So he is planning on introducing IDEA legislation called Defending Special Education Students and Families Act next week. And what this is looking at is getting up to that 40%, so fully funding in relation to the 40% that was promised many, many years ago with the legislation around IDEA. It was actually enacted in 1975, and the states have been facing really only a 16% funding rate on IDEA, and so they're looking at increasing that over a 5-year period to 40%. The piece of what I'm handing out here is information about the Act, about the Defending Special Education Students and Families Act, that will be introduced next week. And we are looking for comments, any concerns you might have, as well as quotes or support for this act going forward. And Congressman Polis does sit on both the Committee on Education and the Workforce, and this will be introduced. He is the ranking member on the subcommittee on early childhood, elementary, and secondary education, and that's where this will be introduced next week.
Do board members have questions on that? I know we'll be talking about it later. Kathy?
I just wanted to say, I think this is sort of the one big item that's been on our board wish list for many years, and so we really appreciate, for the federal point of view, that you're looking at fully funding IDEA, and I think I'm talking way too loud, not Houston single. But anyways, we did add an item to the agenda for later this evening where we have a few sentences that we've crafted because none of us can speak individually on behalf of the board, but the board as a whole will speak to that and make a statement as to whether we agree or not. But I do personally appreciate you and Representative Polis bringing that forward. And I'm very happy to hear that Senator Bennett would also like to see IDEA funded. That would really make a huge difference to our district in funding, because right now we get about 16 cents on the dollar for every dollar that we are required to spend and are not funded for. That's why we have the term unfunded mandate. I know people toss that term around all the time, and a lot of times people just don't get what it means. So I wanted to thank you for helping to fill in some of that, helping to attempt to fill in some of that unattempted, unfunded mandate gap. I can't talk, can I?
It's okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Smizer has a comment as well.
I just wanted to add that I think it goes without saying, but I want to make sure that it gets said. We have no objection to IDEA at all. We are passionate, as a matter of fact, about education for children with all different types of needs and disabilities, and we're proud of our programming, always working to improve it, and we have no issue with the right of these children to receive the best education we can possibly provide. But it's just difficult when somebody else makes the mandate and then doesn't fund it since 1975.
Since 1975. And Congressman Polis realizes that. He is a strong advocate for public schools for all students, and he strongly supports this legislation for children who need extra help, and he recognizes that districts and schools are actually funding this out of their general fund.
Which I should say has the effect of pushing all that to the state budget, because that's where we get our regular funding is from the state. So our states are, all 50 of us, are actually funding that federal law.
Okay, and I think, Mr. Polis, you had a comment on this.
Actually, thank you. Thank you, sir. I have a question. I'd just like to understand better how Poudre School District has been funding this gap, federal funding gap over the years. If you could be a bit more specific and also clarify the statement that as a result of having to fund the, quote, unfunded mandate, that has an impact on the School Finance Act and, the state's portion of funding K through 12.
Okay,
Yeah,
Mr.
sure.
Montoya, okay.
Yeah, sure. So I'll comment on that for you, Senator Cavalos. Basically, what's happening is really the other big source of revenue that we get is the state formula, meaning per pupil revenue. So that formula, that money is provided to districts to provide basic instruction. So that would be normal classroom instruction. It also has some factors in there, as I talk about in my budget presentations, that adjust for at-risk students and things like that. So student characteristics. It does not fund special education. There is a state categorical that does fund some special education, but it's limited in how much it provides. So really the combination of that limited state funding and then probably, I haven't run the numbers recently, but at least pretty close to 80 cents on the dollars maybe coming from the per pupil revenue, maybe closer to 75, 80 cents on the dollar. So basically what we're having to do is take money that was intended for that classroom instruction that does not include adjustments for special education and move that money to fund what is not made up by the federal gap.
We're happy also to provide you with some numbers if that's helpful afterwards.
Well, thank you, Dave, and I appreciate that. I guess I'd just like to make sure that when we're talking about educating students, we're talking about educating all students, and we're talking about as integrated a setting as possible. But I think when you talk about 80 cents or 75 cents or 80 cents to the dollar, I think the implication perhaps is that it's more expensive perhaps to educate students with special needs because perhaps they require more support, more paraprofessionals. Could somebody clarify why this is any different than funding other students, on the per pupil funding?
Well, I think that it kind of gets back to the basic understanding that the mandates provided for special education are coming from the federal level, yet there's no supports for those. Even in our current existing state formula, there's an attempt to adjust for at-risk students, recognizing that there's a different cost of educating those students. There is no formulaic piece of that in the state funding to adjust funding upward for special education students. So I think without that factor, I don't know what else to point to other than the limited state categorical that we get.
Go ahead.
Just a quick question. So I think my question being, there's a difference in terms of the percentage, right? So it's not that 80% of the per pupil funding is going to educate them. It's that 80% of the funding is coming from per pupil. Okay.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, I was trying to clarify for myself because
I think it's an important clarification. I don't know that I spelled that out when I said it, so.
There's a deficiency at the state level specifically to special ed as well. So originally when it passed in 1975 or whenever it was, intended to be 40% specific funding for special education from the feds, 30% specific funding from the state, which I believe we are not providing. Can you remind me what the percentage is for special ed?
I would need to calculate those percentages. In fact, this is the first time I've heard of the state's
30% share?
30% share.
Okay,
so,
I think that would be great for our colleagues here in the legislature to know that it's not just the feds that have underfunded, it is also our state budget that has underfunded, and then 30%.
Do you know when that commitment was made by the state legislature to fund 30%?
The state did not make that commitment. The feds, when they passed that law,
it was in the federal law.
Said that this was how it was going to be done.
That was
and
the
my
breakdown.
Is that correct? Because that's
sounds
my
right.
information that I got from NSBA back when I was
Okay.
a school board member.
So it was another commitment from the feds that we're going to have 40%
It was the feds
and 30%
committing. It was the feds committing
to
the
the state.
states. But I guess I
Wow.
want to point out that while the feds have never fully funded their share, many states, I believe, have actually put in their 30% for special education. Colorado never has, to my
I would
knowledge.
want to run the numbers, but I can say with some certainty that we're not meeting that 30%. So
I think that's a serve over to.
So just for more good news, Poudre School District is one of the lowest reimbursed districts in the state because of the cost of living allowance that hasn't been adjusted since 1997. And of course, our cost of living has gone up,
Mhm.
and Cherry Creek keeps gaining, and we keep losing. So there's just more good news for you. That you probably already knew, but just in case. So right now, the legislature does have a special task force on school finance, and that's a 2-year committee. So I would suggest that we really tuck into that and have a lot of comments and attend. I went to the first meeting, and I'm going to try to go to as many as I can. I also requested to be on that committee, but the speaker didn't appoint me. So
Right.
I'll keep trying.
And Mr. Cavallis?
Thank you, Christoph. Not to belabor this, although I think it's important, I'd like to pose 2 questions that perhaps could be answered at some later time. One is, first of all, I'd like to understand, and I believe my colleague to the right, no pun intended, would like to also understand, and my, sorry.
Fred, throw me into the bus.
You're sitting on the right.
I'll take that.
Well, goodness gracious, this IDEA law has been on the books since 1975. Why in the heck has it been going on for 30, 40 years, whatever the math is, 30 years, that the feds have not fully federally funded this? So I'd like to know the answer to that. There must be some logic or illogic to that. Secondly, Dave Montoya referenced that the state categorical regarding special ed funding is limited. So I'd like to understand what does that mean, and if it's limited, and we're all perhaps in agreement that we ought to be making sure that we're funding students with special needs, why aren't we doing something about that?
Mhm. Yeah, so I would definitely like to run the numbers so that we have the data. I've done it in the past. That's easy for me to do, and I would definitely get that information to everybody here.
And I would say too that it's a highly structured, mandated process, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But when the child's needs are identified and the programmatic needs of the child are agreed to by each individual team, then that's what's going to happen. And so if there's no money from states or feds, it comes from us.
I'm going to let Mr. Pedersen have a comment here. Go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up. And again, I don't sit on education. I always learn so much when I'm here, so I'm taking feverish notes. But my understanding is the school formula, though, is that at risk? Is that equal to or does not include the disabled?
It's a special category.
The at-risk is calculated based on income guidelines, so I don't believe it has anything to do with special education criteria. It's really it's whether you qualify for free lunch under the free and reduced lunch under the federal law.
But isn't there a unique categorical for special
There
education?
is a unique state categorical for
Is that in the formula?
yeah, and that is not in the formula. It's a categorical that sits outside of the state formula. As we've, I mean, I haven't run these numbers recently, but there's a number of categoricals that we have from the state: transportation, gifted and talented, special education. I'm missing a number
English
of them.
language learners.
English language learners is one of the ones that was the most underfunded for a very long time. It was like 3 cents on the dollar that we were spending. That one the state did pick up a little bit, and I think now, last time I looked at it, they were all running at about 20%-ish of what districts are actually spending in those categories.
Rob, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'd like to take the conversation a little bit more generally with respect to budget at the state level in particular. And that is, I guess I'd like to ask our state representatives and senators, or senator, what you feel about, how do you feel in terms of the current funding of education in the state, and to the extent that you believe that additional funding is required, is there any, what prospect do you think there is for that in the current legislative session? Or what steps is the legislature prepared to take to help facilitate the voters acting on something in that arena?
Thank you. So obviously we have the negative factor, which was removed, that word was removed from the mill levy sharing bill last year. My molars are loosening. That word negative factor was put in by Bob Bacon very intentionally to remind everyone that every time that factor came in where we fully fund education per Amendment 23 and then take money away from education, that is the negative factor. He put that in to remind us we're taking money away from an amendment that the people voted on. So that's bad. I'm going to call it the negative factor forever. The governor's proposed budgets come out with an increase for higher education, which everyone knows we're about 49th or maybe 50th in the country on higher education funding. And that is not constitutionally protected at all. I would also submit that K-12 isn't constitutionally protected because we keep doing the negative factor. So I think the discussion this year, the tension is going to be around because the transportation bill failed to refer a measure to the voters to increase sales tax for 20 years. And we did pass the hospital provider fee in a separate bill, so we have some more room under the Tabor cap, if you know what I mean. And I think some of people are going to prefer to try to take that funding and dedicate it solely to transportation. And my argument is not a penny of that before we fully fund K-12. I'm not generally in the majority on that view, but that's where I think that some people are in the other view 100% to transportation. So probably the truth is going to be somewhere in the middle, but hopefully it sways more to K-12. I think that's going to be a big deal. I think like every year, luckily on the Joint Budget Committee for the House side, in our caucus, we have Millie Hamner, who was a superintendent, and Dave Young, who was a high school teacher. They fundamentally understand the need. And we also know the dismal statistics where we used to be 26th in the country-ish in K-12 funding, and now we're, the slope is like that. I don't know where we're bottoming out, 38th somewhere. Where? Oh, we're at 40 now. Okay. So we're probably not, we haven't reached the nadir yet. So, I don't want to be a negative person, but, I think it's going to be a push. I think with advocacy counts, and I don't see anything more important than K-12 funding.
Carolyn.
Angelica, I was wondering if, just for everybody's edification in here, about the special education count, about how, can you talk about how that is growing every year and how we're identifying more kids with needs? And as we identify more kids with needs, we talk about, like Sandra said, we have kids that have needs. We identify programs and things that they need. So every year as funding is going down and the needs of our special education kids are going up, it's creating a disaster for schools. And I was wondering if you could talk about the special education count and how that is, what that is doing right now.
I have to be honest and say I don't know what the statistics, what the count is. It has stayed statewide fairly consistent as a percent of students.
And could you tell?
However, the needs, the specific needs, in many cases are significantly more severe. In going back and just looking a little bit at history, when the special education bill was passed, I believe it was President Ford said, this is really important and we need to be doing this, but I don't think we're ever going to fund it because it's too expensive. Over the years, because of litigation, the expectations of the services of what they really should be for students, the courts have identified more and more expectations. So you know about the case in Douglas County that was just litigated. My understanding is that in Steamboat, which is a relatively small school district, so it's not going to have much of a budget, they had a student that needed to have residence services in a private, so it took out $80,000 a year out of their budget for just one student. I don't know how to speak to it other than to say that the extent of the disabilities, the impact, especially for autism, has really created a much greater need. And it's been filled by school districts not having the money for everything else. Statistically, my understanding is it has not, that the percentage of students, and compared to all students, it has not gone up. It's somewhere in the order of 12%. It's been that 12% for a very long time. It now differs by school district, and that might be, could be for a couple of reasons, but if you're a school district that provides very good services for your special ed students, you are likely to find families who want to move there. It's a reality. So I don't know what Poudre's percentages are, but they could be out of line for that reason. That doesn't change the dynamics, I'm sorry to say. You still have to serve those students. And you have to I think you have to understand those families for why they're doing it, because they want to go to a school district that provides the best services. So I'm not sure I was able to answer your question, but
No, and I think you answered it really well. I just wanted, everybody here to be aware of the pressure that creates for the school districts.
tremendous pressure, tremendous pressure. And it has got, as I said, because of litigation largely, it has become more and more expensive and more intense.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Carolyn. So, can anyone recommend to us how we fix the problem?
Kathy?
Well, as I said, we're very pleased that Jared Polis is going to be putting, hopefully, a piece of legislation on the table next week to fund the 40%. So, no, that's good, and I appreciate that you want to fund it at the state level, too. I just wanted to point out, though, that this is a little sheet that you should all have in front of you, and it's actually a wonderful...
Kathy, we don't have it.
Oh, you don't have it. Could we get them some? They're on the back table, and I'm a little bit crippled at the moment. But basically what this is, it's a very dense fact sheet about how our district is funded, at what level, what the factors are, that we're 40th in the nation. If you look at the back of this sheet, the little diagram that they were referring to about how the line continues to go down. We understand as a board that there's, difficulties with the state budget, and I think that we're cognizant of, the issues with Tabor and the funding cap and all that, and that it's going to be a little bit better maybe this year. There's not going to be quite the pressure, but I think that all of us would ask that we take this maybe time out in the year that we have at the state level with slightly less pressure on, are you going to just take more money away from funding to maybe try and figure out a solution? I think one of the concerns that we have is that our state legislature has never referred a measure to the voters, as they could under Tabor, to increase the revenue in order to properly fund education or transportation or whatever it may be. I mean, the legislature does have the power to refer these things to the voters, and personally, I think that would be a very fiscally responsible thing for the state to do. And I guess one other thing I do want to mention that's not explicitly on our legislative agenda that we understand we'll be grappling with a lot this year is PARA. PARA is once again in this huge funding disaster of a situation where their projections are unattainable. They're one of the people who was at the recent, it was a financial analyst who used to sit on the PARA board, was one of the speakers on the panel at the fall CASB delegate conference. And what he said was that the way PARA is making their projections, it's like they're hitting home runs every single year. And as we all know, when we're like even doing our own personal finances, if you invest money, do you make, a home run worth of money every year? Not so much, right? And so the PARA outlook is overly optimistic, and even with their overly optimistic estimates, they're in trouble. And I think we see that as a huge liability for our employees, for our school district, and for the state. And we need to figure out a way to make this work. And I know that's going to be probably one of the biggest things on it. I don't personally know what all the solutions are, but just know that as the board here, we are committed to trying to look at those solutions with you and bring our perspective to whatever might come before you, because I know that's going to be something that's really huge on the plates of our state legislators this year. Dave? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, what are you, chopped liver?
Okay. I just wanted
We're done laughing.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on the para thing. I was at a meeting the other day, and the state's budget director works for the governor's office, was presenting and was talking about the $70 million buy down that Representative Arndt had mentioned. My concern about that is I don't know that they're being very transparent with what the intent of that is. The intent of that $70 million drop in the negative factor is to offset potential increases in para. So I'm glad everybody's shaking their heads that they know that, because that was the first time I had heard that. I suspected that for a while. And if that's the case, I think it's going to be up to the legislature to be very mindful that for school districts, if that's really the intent of what's going on, we need to be explicitly told that so that we can communicate that. And it's also important that those two things happen in the same time frame. Because what could happen is we could have a $70 million buy down on the negative factor next year, and then para ends up coming up or ratcheting up slower than that. It depends on how the legislation looks, but those two should be tied together if that's the intent.
Okay, we have some response. Go ahead. Senator Kapoulis, please. Yeah.
Thank you. So let me make sure I understand some of these numbers and some of these suggestions. So, and then I have a question regarding Board Member Kipps or Kathy's comment, if I may. So it is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the governor's proposed fiscal year 18-19 budget has in it, based on the September revenue forecast, perhaps somewhat based on the passage of the hospital provider fee bill, that might be a separate dollar amount, but that there's an increase of $270 million in the budget for K through 12, which is about a 4% increase. And if I'm wrong, please make sure, correct me. And you're suggesting, or it's been suggested, that the intent is to draw down 70 mil, or the plan is to draw down, of the 850 million, whatever the negative factor is, to draw down 70 million, and that perhaps that's to offset this increase funding based on the state budget. But I guess, so I'd like to make sure if that increase is correct that I've just shared. And secondly, since the governor's proposal doesn't include a 2% increase on the part of employers to help with the para issue, how can we make that connection?
Yeah, I think that's a very important distinction, because you're absolutely right. What the governor's proposal is saying is that that's going to be on the employees, but if you follow that through, what that means is that the 2%, that means that every employee is going to take a 2% cut or reduction in pay. So I'm asking the question because I heard it from the governor's budget director. Those school districts should be mindful that this $70 million drawdown of the negative factor should be thought of alongside the para reduction, whether it's on the employer or the employee side. So I'm just saying, if that's the explicit direction of what the legislature is trying to accomplish, it would be nice for them to say the $70 million buy down the negative factor is to help protect the pay reductions that employees would be incurring, if that's what the intention is.
So, thank you, Christoph. Just to make a point that's obvious but we often overlook, that's the executive branch making that proposal. We are the legislative branch, and we represent the people in a different way. It ain't over till it's over. The governor has a proposal. He sends out his budget. He has his para proposal. His para proposal doesn't match the para board's proposal. Yeah, I know you know all this, but it was always interesting to go back to 8th grade and go, oh yeah, they actually do clash a lot. So we do. And so our JBC, I'm sure, is not in lockstep with those issues. And hopefully, but those are really good points to take to the JBC to our JBC when they're crafting the budget, because technically we write the budget, or the JBC, the joint, and we can bring amendments to the long bill. And if we're seeing things in PSD, we're happy to run I'm happy to run amendment for us on that. I don't sit on the JBC. I'll talk to the JBC, and we can go to the JBC meeting on the day they do education, but we can also run an amendment. So I appreciate the governor's putting forth these ideas. I also hope that, we fully understand the power of the legislature as well.
I appreciate the understanding that these are all ideas at this point, and I think it's great that we're having the conversation because the session hasn't started, and so it's a great time to get to you folks and say, hey, this is what we're hearing, and this is the direction we're hearing, and that way when it does come to the legislature from the executive branch, at least you have some information ahead of time until it drops. So I appreciate that.
Okay, Kathy.
So I just wanted to point out that in the 4%, because I think this gets lost a lot of times, you talked about, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but just get the general idea here. I think you said it was about $240 million. Well, so in actuality, a lot of that money is actually covering the growth of our student population and the inflationary numbers. So what you're really left with, and I believe it was about $87 million that it would be reducing from what is now known as the budget stabilization factor, formerly known as the negative factor. By the way, it used to be also called the budget stabilization factor until they changed the name because of the initials. So just to say that you went from one thing to the other and back again. Yeah, it takes a minute, doesn't it? So, so it was only going to reduce the negative factor, budget stabilization factor, by that $87 million. So then if you're taking that $70 million out, yeah, we're still, this much ahead of where we were this year. But keep in mind that the negative factor, budget stabilization factor, is still, right now it's about $831 million. So if you take money away from that, but add some back in because it's going to cost us money, you're only getting a net gain of like $17 million or something like that. So, I mean, we appreciate it, but we still need to wipe it out. I'll tell you, for our district, that number is we're losing over $26 million a year that we feel like the voters said in Amendment 23 that our district should be getting, that we're not getting. So we have, as a result of that, we have larger class sizes. We have also have had more state-level unfunded mandates, right? Because, for instance, Senate Bill 191, the Educator Effectiveness Act, we've had to place a lot of assistant principals in every single one of our buildings, right? And that's a large cost to the district that we do not get extra money for. We actually have to take that out of the $26 million less that we're getting every year. So things like that thing that you think, oh, well, that should just be easy for them to do, don't worry about it, those actually have huge costs to our district. And it's those kinds of things that make it more difficult for us to educate our kids. And I'm just going to tell you that flat out, where we are as a district, this is a lot of great information on this sheet, but this last year, we had to figure out how to get our reserves back to a reasonable position, and we're having to look at every single position in our district and whether it's valuable or not. And we were lucky enough not to have to take, I think, too many, really cuts this year, but we're not that far away from making some really huge cuts in our district, and I hate to have to say that because there's probably people who are watching, it's like, oh, is that me? But yeah, it's people's jobs, because when was it 84% of our budget is people. We're talking about people's jobs here, and we're talking about the education of kids and being able to serve kids adequately. So, I mean, we don't criticize you for what you're all about, we just appreciate that you're here to help work on this problem with us.
So I'm going to jump in and see if I can help our conversation a little bit. So I love your last comment, and I'm going to step back to what Senator Kefauver said, asking for the second time in 2 weeks, what are solutions? And really what I see is this opportunity for this dialogue. If we can consider these somewhat open slates of legislation, especially at the state level, you know, that's where maybe we could focus our conversation. What little things can we advise you to, or, you know, work our legislative agenda to support you? What are ideas of where we could take this? And I just throw that open-ended question out there and see if anybody has ideas how we could work in that direction. Representative Arndt.
Sorry, thank you. I hope I'm not speaking too much, but I was going to ask Kathy Kipp when she said we could, you know, a referred measure to the ballot. I'm listening. Amendment 66 didn't go, and we have Amendment 23. I'm very open to any ideas about what specific type of referred measure that would be most beneficial, other than, you know, Amendment 23 to me is full funding for K-12, and we're still circumventing that. Do you have an idea of a different referred measure? Yeah.
Well, I know that some of our funding problems are due to how 23, Gallagher, and Tabor are all interact together. So can't we do something to fix Gallagher? Can we do something to fix Tabor? I know that means going back to the voters and asking them to do that. And I know a lot of people have said, no, that the voters are not ready for that. But if we don't at least try and keep trying, I don't know that the message ever gets out to the voters that Tabor and Gallagher are interacting in unexpected or maybe expected ways we should have expected or foreseen. But there's just no way out of that unless we fix the underlying problem, and everybody keeps dancing around it. What are we going to do about Tabor and Gallagher?
Senator Kafalis?
With your permission. Yeah, I'm trying not to. I appreciate Jenny's comments and want to make sure there's a space for other folks to speak. A couple of observations and suggestions and maybe a question. One is, so earlier Kathy suggested why aren't we referring something to the voters? And so one question there is whether or not such a referred measure, which would have a daunting obstacles in the legislature, whether or not that needs to be a Senate concurrent resolution or does it need to be a bill. And I've asked Ann Barkus to look into that because it does matter. But regardless, you still have to get something. If it's actually funding, and depending on what the funding source, if it's an income tax increase or something, then it needs 2/3 majority in both chambers. However, there are advocacy groups, I think, working on this school funding issue with an eye towards subsequent years. So strategically, it would be helpful, and that's why you have lobbyists to find out what is, you know, is there a game plan, and could that game plan include some type of referendum that would have at least raise some discussion. So those are some things to think about. I'm not sure what the answer is. And as far as the Tabor, Gallagher, whatever else you want to put, and whatever else, as my good friend, former Speaker Romanoff used to say, Amendment 23 is like having your foot on the accelerator, and all the others are like having your foot on the brake, and it gets pretty difficult to try to figure that out. But as you know, Carolyn, I mean, you can't just deal with all that in one fell swoop. There are differences of opinions about that. Last session, for example, there was a bill concerning the Tabor formula, which actually came from Republican colleagues, and it would have, in my mind at least, and others, created a formula that is more reflective of economic conditions. And that bill seemed to have a lot of logic, but when it came over to our chamber, it did not prevail. So there have been efforts, but it's just not an easy thing.
Okay, and Dr. Smizer had a comment.
I think one of the things that I see happening year after year is that the large components of the state budget were all pitted against each other. So if your favorite is transportation, you're going to do a transportation bill. If your favorite is education, let's just solve that piece of the puzzle. And what we really have is a state budget that includes health care. And if we really want healthy economic vitality of commerce, then we need transportation. We also need a K-12 and university system that's been crushed economically to keep our pipeline going so that we have a vibrant state and we don't have to import everybody to work here. So it's all about all of us, and I would love to see something that is all of us working together to figure out, okay, here's all the pieces, and stop pitting us against each other. We advocate mostly for K-12, but we recognize we're part of the whole.
And you understand, Sandra, and everybody understands that everyone has different opinions about this. And there are those in the legislature, and I say this very respectfully, that believe that we should be able to do a better job of funding K through 12 education with the money that we currently have. And so one of the debates is that Medicaid is eating up the state budget, and it's not to be dismissed. That needs to be looked at, and I think we've made progress on how to deal with those kinds of costs. But there are those who believe, you know, cut Medicaid, and those state dollars are freed up, and then they go through education. So there are different opinions about whether we can do it with the current pie or how do we appropriately enlarge the pie. I think you folks get that, right? That's why it's so much fun at the legislature. But otherwise it would be boring.
And I'm going to turn over to Ms.
Well, just
Schroeder.
real quickly, I wanted to point out that this week when you go to the CASB conference, I hope you will hear the discussions of some of the special initiatives and the groups that are working on 2018 or 2020, et cetera. So there are a lot of discussions by non-legislators, but basically there are a whole lot of economists that are nervous about what's going to happen in our state, and they are working very hard to come up with some different alternatives. My background is in finance and accounting. It is not an enjoyable topic to explain to the citizenry. It is not sexy. It just, you know, when you tell the stories, it's very hard to tell. Those of us who are geeks in this area know that there just is not a very easy way to explain this to the public, and I think that's part of the reason. I think that, when, for example, when we were just talking about special education, I don't really think that our public understands what effect that has on a school district, that we have some very, very high-cost students, and they have every right to have the full services. But those just bringing that out in the public and having a really thoughtful discussion. We're either fighting with each other. I think that the proposal that you discussed that was very appealing to a lot of folks. It looked like there were going to be some winners and losers in terms of school districts. Nothing's going to work. There's no way that's going to work if there's any school district that loses a cent in any proposal to redistribute our income. Those are some of the complexities, but I encourage you this week to seek out some of those discussions, because I think I find them very rich, and I know CASB's been having them for some time.
I'm going to, oh, well, let's hear from Kristen. How about that?
And I just actually wanted to bring this back to what you had said, Angelica, and then also to Kim. So you're talking about personal stories and how it's hard to sell this, if you will, because of the personal stories. You know, with finance, it's a tough sell. And you had mentioned right at the beginning that you were looking for comments and personal stories. So what exactly are you looking for, and where can we send them? And do you want them from parents? Do you want them from educators? Do you want them from the students themselves? Because I feel like a lot of times those personal stories can really help sell what it is that we need to be, you know, the full funding for IDEA, the fact that we are looking at a funding crisis and people need to understand that, and so we need to be talking about that at that level.
And so the type of stories are just what you mentioned. It helps Congressman Polis to be able to talk about this, whether in committee or on the floor of the House or with colleagues if he has stories, and it can be everything from the students to the families to the teachers and the schools, and how this impacts them to either not have funding or what the funding would mean to them to be able to get this type of funding. And Congressman Polis, we've just redone the front page of our website, and Congressman Polis has a place where you can tell your story, and it allows you to fill out a form and then tell your story. And that there's also a box there that you can check to allow us to use that story. And we'll use it also in publicity that we put out through social media as well as press releases. And so you can limit, how it's used, but if you can leave it open and allow us to use your story, that is very, very helpful. And you're right, it does make it personal, and it makes it much more compelling for.
Great. And just to follow up, if I can, is it possible then to use those stories that people might share with Polis for state as well? Is there something that we could do to share that so that we can not only get the 40% from federal, but the 30% from state?
Piggyback on
big.
it. That's right. So we have our communications director would be probably willing to talk with or work with whoever might want to work with us. The stories that we need to be probably around the legislation and a federal level. But I would encourage other legislators as well on a state level to get those stories and be able to use that information, so however they see fit.
I think Great Ed Colorado has collected an awful lot of stories, if I'm not mistaken. That's the organization that's been working very hard on fiscal issues. To what extent we can start collaborating? If there is an initiative that's forthcoming, that might be really helpful.
Okay, Senator Follis, did you have a comment on that as well, or Representative Buck?
In regards to this?
In regards to
I believe, and it goes back to your question that you started and it then got here. So I would like to address your question. And I'll be honest with you, my thoughts and how I go down to that legislature is I ask myself, what's the role of government? And our promise to the people is education and transportation. And I got to ask this room, what have we done for that lately? What have we done for the people? And as much as I'd like to tweak Gallagher or get that guy and just, because now trying to reverse something is asking the taxpayer, yeah, sure, I want to tax myself more. That just, it's a tough one. Tabor, I think it keeps government in the confinement it needs to, because it's just an animal that keeps growing and growing and growing. But, I got to ask the school districts, my frustration is we've heard federal mandates, we've heard state mandates. Folks, we can talk about Ref C money for education, where did that go? We can talk about Amendment 23, where is that money going? We can talk about even the marijuana, where is that money going? And I have to tell you, to me, it sits in this bureaucracy, because it's, again, more unfunded mandates on data mining, it's more audiologists, more counselors. And I tell you, you bring in more of this trying to tack on the special ed or the disabled. My heart goes out there completely, but you're going to have to bring in more different teachers, and the cost of bringing more different teachers is even going to put more of a burden on you. So I just want to know, when does the schools look and say, we don't want to take any more unfunded mandates unless you fully fund. And that's where that rubber meets the road in my eyes. No one's backing the unfunded, whether it's federal or state, and saying enough's enough. So that's kind of where I'm at. But I definitely believe the role of education is education. The role of government is education.
So I hear you saying that we need to get clear messaging that is effective to you, to help you, in a sense, with those kind of issues. So is that part of where you're going with that?
It's almost like, I know public education is to educate the masses, but your difficulties is providing the services for all of those ones that most teachers didn't sign up for anything other than just teaching the reading, writing, and arithmetics. Now they're being taught, being told they've got to be the disciplinarian, they've got to be the nurturer, they've got to be more than they ever signed up for. So I don't know where you ever can draw that line. But you're always going to feel the burden, and the burden's going to be there unless the state stops putting unfunded mandate and unless the feds stop putting unfunded mandates.
And I'm going to let Senator Gonzalez jump in with right there, too.
Thank you, Christoph, and thank you, Representative Buck. I think I'd like to get back to kind of in that spirit that we just heard, looking at 3 or 4 ideas that I'd like some of the smart people around this table and the lobbyists to the right over there to work on. One is I'd like to understand why the feds, and this might go to the federal folks, why they haven't fully funded the IDEA law, from 1975. Secondly, at the school finance, PSD School Finance Forum that Dave was so kind enough to be at, and that some of the board members were there, which was very informative. I seem to remember that there was a discussion about one of the factors dealing with high-cost areas. Maybe I have that wrong, but that's one of the factors that factors into the, I believe, into the per pupil funding, or that's the factor on top of the per pupil funding. And so the question that came up was, what are the criteria that they're using to determine high-cost areas? Because it seems like Fort Collins is a pretty darn high-cost area. So I'd like to further explore what are those criteria, and that maybe there is something we can do about that that's not necessarily asking for new money. So that's one thing. The federal thing, why haven't they ponied up since they put this on the books? And nobody likes unfunded mandates, and we've somewhat gotten the message at the state level. We're very cautious about sending you stuff that's not going to get paid for, because we know everybody gets upset with us. But the other thing is on the categoricals, on the special ed categorical, I would like to understand why you view it as, quote, limited. What exactly, how does it work? And is there something we can do there to strengthen it so that if there is a school district that is serving more students with needs, a higher number, shouldn't the funding reflect that? And then this 30% thing, I'd like to know what's going on. What's this 30% thing that we're required to fund 30% out of the 100%, for the students with special needs? That's what the good person from the state school board suggested, that when the IDEA passed, there was something in there that states had to provide 30%. I'd like to know that too. Thank you.
Okay, with that, should I go with Kathy then? Or Carolyn? Okay.
So I was just looking on Great Ed Colorado's website page, and they were talking about some of the increased cost for students, and what we have is at-risk students. It generally costs 20 to 58% more to bring an at-risk child to the academic proficiency. We have special needs students, which we've already talked about, and we're generally, it says, funded at 20%, even though it costs twice as much. Generally, twice as much to educate a child with special needs. And then there's one thing we haven't talked about yet, and that's English language learners. There's the cost for that. It says here that we receive less than $300 a year to bring non-proficient children to a proficient level. And so those are some of the at-risk factors that we have to address that we're not being adequately funded for.
Was that 300? You said 300. What is that?
We receive $300 per year for a student who's an English language learner, and that's to bring them to proficiency.
So $300?
$300 a year.
Is that on top of the per pupil funding?
It's my understanding, yes, that is on top of the per pupil funding.
Is that everyone else's understanding?
Mm-hmm.
So the state per pupil revenue is $7,277. So that means that for ELL students, the PSD is getting an additional $300 or so to get those kids up to speed in terms of academics and language?
Does that sound about right, Dave? That's what they're reporting here in
Yes.
Great Education Colorado.
Dave, do you want to do that again?
Yeah.
I was just contemplating what we can buy for $300 to bring those kids to proficiency.
I'm just trying to
Yeah,
understand numbers.
yeah. I think you're, yeah, and I think one of the things that may be helpful is, and I'm learning this as we're talking, is I would be happy to invite folks back to maybe have a more detailed conversation around numbers, because it's hard to do in a public forum, especially when we don't have them handy in front of us. I'm more than happy to do that.
And I would welcome that especially when there are answers to the questions we've raised tonight. Sorry.
No, that's all right. And, you know, it's interesting, so many schools are doing these mill overrides and bonding but there are districts that the state's backfilling that we probably don't need to be backfilling. And that's also what the legislature is looking at.
Yeah, just to bring some clarity, Senator Cafalas had brought up I forgot how he phrased it, but I think what you're talking about is the cost of living factor. And that was one of the factors I talked about at that forum. That was one that was already brought up earlier, that the cost of living factor, I've been scratching my head for years wondering why Fort Collins is at the bottom of that curve. And, you know, I understand that the cost of living in Cherry Creek and Denver are probably higher, but not that much higher. So yeah, that is something where we need to look. And Senator Cafalas, I do need to find out if that's driven by the legislature. I believe it is, because the legislature does it every 2 years. And so because districts have to pay for that cost of living study as a small rescission each year, or every 2 years. But that is something that, you know, if we can get some traction on looking at doing that differently in a more fair way, I'm all for it.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what's killing us on that, on the school finance formula, that PSD. That's the factor that's really hurting us. So that's why that 2-year commission is so important, the interim committee looking at this, because it hasn't changed since 1997, and we need to get in there, because, yeah. And, well, never mind.
Okay, and then just bookkeeping, to honor everybody's time, I was thinking, unless the conversation's just steaming, we might try to wrap it up in the next 25 minutes, which we can do. But there you go. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob for the next question.
Mr. Chair, is that a suggestion you'd like me to leave now, or what?
Don't push me.
I thought that was directed towards me.
Yeah, I wanted to just touch again on something that Representative Arden brought up, and also that Dr. Smyser mentioned, and that's this question of the whole budget being viewed together, right? And I think I can speak for the legislative subcommittee and perhaps more that we are concerned, Representative Arndt, about the possibility of some kind of a isolated fix, quote unquote, going through for transportation or some other favored item that perhaps has more direct impact on a larger number of residents in the state, more obvious direct impact, right? Because they drive on the roads and whatever, and not everybody has kids in schools. So we have although of course there's a critical indirect impact of education on the whole economy of the state, right? And that's sort of a message that we need to continue to share with all of our constituents. But anyway, I think we definitely share the concern on a transportation item going through without dealing with the whole budget, or at least without including education in there, because frankly we're concerned that that'll take pressure off the need for the broader solution and leave education in the dust, if you will. And I know that certainly wouldn't be anybody on this panel's intent, right? But we also have to be realistic, as a number of you have mentioned, about where the voters are going to come out on anything that requires voter approval, right? And how many times we can go to the voters, and what we need to say, and how we need to characterize the nature of the problem, which is a broader budget problem than just education or just transportation. So I would ask you to keep that in mind as things that actually are able to be done by the legislature are done. Thanks.
Okay,
I
we have
raised
some,
my hand.
yes, go right ahead, Representative
So
Barr.
thank you very much. Yeah, and that's exactly where this big discussion is. So the Denver Metro Chamber is leading the charge to bring to the ballot in 18 a citizen referred measure on transportation, just so you know.
And another reason not to think that we're fighting between education and transportation, in 1999, we bonded our sales tax, and we've got 28 projects done. So that should not deter us from funding education to adequate levels. But that's my thoughts. I'm not sure I can get my comrades on board.
All right, and Kathy.
So just some thoughts on what people have been talking about. I guess, you know, I'd like to come back to really Representative Buck's point. People talk about being able to, some of those districts, some of those rich rural districts as opposed to the poor rural districts, right? They are the ones who, because of the ratchet down effect of Tabor over the years, their base property taxes for what they contribute to the school funding formula is so low that they could very easily afford to pay their full share and not have the state backfilling it. That is a totally fair point. And I think it's also fair to note that back in the ancient days before Tabor, before I think even Gallagher, that everybody in the state was paying like 40 mills for their share of what went to public education. Now really the top tier in that is 29 mills, okay? And that's not counting mill levy overrides and stuff that voters pass on a countywide basis. But everybody was paying 40 mills or up to the amount that would fully fund their kids. So that's totally gone out the window. I think the minute you start talking about, well, we have a higher cost of living, and so we should be getting more of that limited pot of money. The pot of money is only so big. And once we start doing that, and I will just tell you, in school board circles, we call that rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And nobody likes doing it because nobody wants to throw their fellow districts under the bus. Because as bad as we have it here, and as low as our funding is, and as pinched as we feel, we know that of the 178 districts in the state, a lot of them are worse off than we are. They didn't make the same conservative decisions that we made back in 2008 when it came to the destruction of the economy, right? And so we made some very conservative choices. Other districts, for instance, took money out of their reserves so that, thinking that they would eventually get that money back, and then that didn't happen, and so now they're in an even worse fiscal place. I wanted to mention a couple of the fiscal things that are on the horizon. I know Great Education has been working on some citizens initiatives, and my issue with their citizens initiatives right now that they're going to bring to the ballot possibly in 2018 is that they are only for education, and I think that is a concern because as much as I want to fund education, I'm not sure that if we don't take a more global approach that we're going to get something that our voters are going to approve. Let's talk about the Colorado Fiscal Institute. My understanding is that they're going to wait till 2020 to bring something, and I think it'll be a more global solution. And one of the reasons somebody mentioned at a program I was at, given by somebody from the Colorado Fiscal Institute, they said the reason they weren't going to do it sooner was because they did a poll, and most people think that Tabor is a shopping center down in Denver. And so a lot of people don't understand our fiscal situation. As you said, Angelica, it's a really hard thing to explain. We're trying to figure out and go about how to explain it better. I think that looking at the current funding is a good thing. My problem is, as much as I go around and look at the budget, I don't see where there is enough money. And I know you and I differ on that. And so I think that it might be a really good conversation to have, actually, and say, well, are there other places in the budget currently that we could get that money? I don't know, but I think it's a good conversation to have. A couple of years ago at the CASB Joint Budget Committee session, Pat Stedman, who was term limited at that point, was throwing out all kinds of ideas that I think, you know, because he couldn't run again, he was like throwing out ideas I didn't think would fly, but they were ideas, right? What, like for instance, what about means testing, you know, the homestead exemption, right? There's all kinds of things that you could do, but for instance, seniors vote. So who wants to do that? Who wants to put themselves out there for that kind of thing? So there's money there, but I'm not sure people consider it to be viable. Yeah, and I guess one more thing I just want to point out. So we are looking for solutions. We're going to go be working with all these different pieces on solutions. I want to look at all of them. I want to look at, you know, is there current money we can move around? Is there something to the great education stuff that's going on? What about the Fiscal Institute? What are they doing? And where can we get the best coalition to move forwards? But I do want to say one thing about education funding. Education is that one area where we keep doing more with less. We are really a darn good school district. But if we, due to our economic constraints, were to fail more of our children, what would the message be? The message would be that public education is broken. You guys are failing our kids and you don't deserve any more money. Well, it's a double-edged sword for us because, you know, and I don't want to say it here on TV, but, you know, we're darned if we do and we're darned if we don't, right? Where we get it both ways. If we do have enough, if we're making do, you have enough money and you're doing, you know, you're doing good stuff for our kids. And if we fail our kids, well, you know, you obviously aren't doing a good enough job. And I just want to say, yeah, we're a darn good school district and we're doing everything we can, but we could do better stuff. There is more we could do for our children. There is more that we could do to vitalize our economy by giving the people, the occupations, the employers in our community and in our state, the citizens they need to fill the jobs that they have available. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country. And we aren't willing to pay to educate our workforce. So I'm done. Thank you. Thank you guys all for being here tonight on my behalf.
Can I make a request?
Yes.
Because I went to, I think I shared probably last time I was here, I went to the Windsor School Board, and, you know, the first thing they said was needing money, and I said to them, what about 23 and Ref C and all of that good stuff? And truth of the matter, I don't think they ever saw any monies. And a lot of it because of these unfunded types of mandates, whether it's federal or state level. And what I would love is a list of those unfunded. And for example, was data mining. You know, that cost of someone having to data mine each child. How much is that? And then how many more counselors did you have to put in your schools? How much are you paying for an audiologist, and how much was that required, and how much are you paying for that? I want to know those unfunded types of things. Just give me the list. And then I would love to know at the federal level. I do know somebody at the federal level that I would love it if I could get some of that unfunded mandates. Nothing is worse to have something on your neck that, you know, you can't respond to. Exactly.
Okay, Mrs. Schroeder.
At the risk of changing the subject, and I don't know if that's okay or not,
Absolutely, keep going.
I just wanted to point out that we in the state of Colorado are in the process of relooking at our academic standards. I think this is really very, very important. It's an opportunity here from our educators and from our parents, what's working and what's not working in our Colorado standards. So the board last month heard the recommendations for 4 standard areas. We're going to have two more meetings where different constituent groups will come forward to give us standards suggestions in computer science, science, visual arts, world languages, music, social studies, reading, writing, and communicating. This is an opportunity to hear from you all, and we take it very, very seriously. So I'm hoping that you've encouraged your teachers to provide. We are not anticipating, we have not heard anyone who has said, let's throw them out. What we mostly hear from teachers is that they are very grateful. They have academic standards that they can tie their curriculum to what the expectations are, to what kids need to know and be able to do. That does not mean that Colorado got it right in 2010. There are some differences in, so I'm not an educator, but in the sequence of items, in the amount of detail. There are a lot of opinions out there from especially from our educators. This is the time to hear from them in these coming months. So the standards are going to be online, and I hope that you'll somehow, I know how busy teachers are, but if you'll encourage them to look at this, encourage them to look at the curriculum that they've been using to make sure that the curriculum does align with that. This is a great opportunity for things to, I mean, we've only been implementing the standards since, what, 2014? So it's still kind of new, but I think there's been enough time to find out where are the glitches. And this is the opportunity. We're only going to do this I've now forgotten. I think it's every 8 years. So this is a really important, this is what the board will be taking most seriously this spring.
Representative Arndt.
So I just have a question about that, and I'm glad that continual improvement is part of what the state board's looking at. I am an educator, and assessment was my specialty. So if the standards change, the assessment changes, and if the high-stakes testing for schools, districts, and teachers is based upon the assessments, are based upon standards, that's curriculum that the teachers teach, we change the standards again now. I'm concerned about the validity of the data in the high-stakes evaluation of our teachers, schools, and districts.
So I guess I wasn't really clear in what I said. We are not anticipating dramatic changes in the standards. If there are dramatic changes in the standards, that will be a serious, loud discussion. Right. So we are going to have some changes in our assessments. Not that the assessments are going to be dramatically different, but they will be developed by Colorado educators. So we are moving away from the park. Yay! I don't know if you know, but we had 40 Colorado teachers developing the park assessments. So it's not necessarily, in fact, it's not going to be a dramatic change in what we're going to have, but it'll be our own. So I think that's important for educators in Colorado to have that sense that these are our assessments. It has a downside, which is that we will no longer have the opportunity to compare ourselves to other states. That was seen, and that's a yin and yang, that was seen as an advantage back when we got the money to develop these multi-state assessments. The pushback was such that. But note that at the high school level, the assessments are going to be nationally normed assessments. They are aligned with our Colorado standards, and we will keep an eye on that. But I would not be worrying, or let me put it this way, I will worry more than you are worrying if in fact we have such dramatic changes that,
I'm not sure.
yeah, we actually are in this upcoming CMAS assessment period going to be testing a few questions that we've been developing in our state, just in order to field test them, because you have to go through some pretty specific efforts in order to make any kind of changes, and in order to add new items. So I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of this, what I think is a really important opportunity. I don't want us to adopt in June new content standards and then here we didn't get a chance to input. We've been asking now for 6 months, but I want to encourage especially board members to talk to parents who have concerns about the standards, to encourage them to look at them and to ask questions and to ask the teachers questions about what their kids are learning. The Department of Education will have a lot of information online for parents to explain some of the standards grade by grade. So I want to make sure that you find, maybe put some links out in your communications, because I think the support from teachers has been really great. I don't know how well parents are aware of what we've been doing. Thank
Okay.
you.
I tell you what, I think if I pushed hard enough, we could keep this conversation going a long time. It's really excellent. I think what I'm going to do again to honor all of your time is throw it to, if anybody in the room at the table here has closing comments that you'd like to share with us, why don't we do that, and then we'll see where it goes in the next 10 minutes. Did you have one, by the way, Sandra? Okay.
Not to start a whole conversation, we've talked a lot about funding on the revenue side to match the needs of kids. At the same time, we're noticing a lot of the needs of our kids are really going up. You mentioned autism and other types of needs, but I will tell you that we are not alone in seeing an increase in mental health. And because our counties and our other services aren't all fully staffed up in huge amounts of K-12 age level mental health services, it's falling on us. We have a whole cadre now of mental health experts in our district, and we always need more. And I'm not sure what's happening. I've been reading a lot about it, and a lot of people are blaming these things, and we're not sure. But we can tell you that the severe mental health needs of all of our kids is increasing. It's on the rise. It has been for several years, and we are not alone. So that's just a whole nother thing out there on the horizon.
Okay. Would our guests like to have any closing comments? We can start with you, Ann, or Kim, either way. Okay.
I just wanted to make sure to reiterate that Congressman Polis is on, he's a ranking member on the Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education. He is a strong advocate for education. He is, believes that education is the single most meaningful investment America can make in its economic future and in its people. And his efforts in this area focus on making accountability work at all levels, expanding educational models, and improving persistently failing schools with data-driven changes to close achievement gaps. Building an excellent public education system that provides each and every child with the opportunities to succeed is the best possible investment in America's future. And he is a strong advocate for public education and does not support privatizing education nor vouchers for private schools. He's in your court. He is willing to advocate for you. Please contact me, and I can, work with you and get information to our people in Washington, D.C., as well as to the congressman. And we're here to help support public education. He's a very, very strong advocate for you all. And we too are concerned about unfunded mandates. And as you'll see in the IDEA legislation, they're looking at taking money from defense in order to pay for that. So. There is money, he believes, in the federal government to be able to fund these mandates, and he is, again, a very strong advocate for education and believes in it.
I just want to thank you again for your activism, your communication, forums like this, the partnership that we have, and I'm very appreciative, so thank you.
I'm very grateful. Very grateful to join you tonight. There is a big learning curve. I mean, it's too bad we can't get every legislator in here and we can have this dialogue, and then unfortunately we don't get that opportunity. So I'm very, very grateful to be here, and along with my colleagues who I think we work real well. And it's interesting in the House. My understanding is they work really well. I know Congressman Buck and Polis have passed bills together, so there's I want you to all know that we all are in the spirit of making America great again. I don't know, can't believe I said that. I did not say that. No, but something that I look forward to, and that is working again with Ann Vargas, and I will hopefully see all of you here helping testify on my bill that I believe we can get it done this year. So thank you again.
I think enough has been said. I just want to say thank you. It's been a constructive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. I will add a comment to my esteemed colleagues here, and that is that when I asked staff to kind of give me an idea what I should talk about forward-looking, it was about the standards and assessments and accountability, which has not been a big problem for Poudre, so I don't need to go into the details of some of the challenges that we have for very low-performing school districts, because you're not one of them. But the other piece that really is our work is setting rules. And so what I have here is page after page of rules hearings. And those rules hearings occur because you folks in the legislature keep passing bills. So if you want to make our life somewhat simpler, be very thoughtful about all the different, because every law that you pass that's about education, we need to go through and have a hearing and set the rules, interpret what you thought you wanted, hear from districts what's actually going to happen to them, et cetera. So I guess it's just, I mean, I've been kind of thrilled not to hear about 5 different bills that you all are going to carry that are going to dramatically change things, which is what we were doing there for about 6 or 7 years. But, yeah, well, one's fine. But I just wanted you to know that this is just from the legislation hearings, I have page after page, that we haven't gotten to from the last legislative session. So just a little request.
Not on the committee.
Thank you.
I don't know. John had the question about what were they thinking in 1975. So, you know, as you know, there is the disconnect, but at the federal level between the bills that are passed and then, of course, passing the appropriations bills to fund those things. So that's where that disconnect happened. But I was born in 1975, so I don't know. Michael Bennett was 10, but it is his birthday today, and I can say that he does wish he could be here, I'm sure. But he had to celebrate his birthday by voting against the tax bill and holding a Facebook town hall meeting. So, but thank you all for inviting us, and we'll. If you have any follow-up questions, you have my contact information, or I can give you a card, or comments. We're always here, not just this day of the year, so thanks.
Well,
Nice work.
let me, on behalf of the board, just thank you all for coming. It is truly a treasure to get us all sitting together and talking. I feel like we walked away with a list of questions that were asked, some possible ideas, some good discussion. I just do hope we can keep the tradition alive and see all of you and maybe more next year. So,
if I may, Mr. Chair, just a
final
bit of advice. So we've raised questions, some things to look into and all that. And I would say that if you want us to do something, and I would hope you know this by now, you need to make a specific ask. Do you want us to carry a bill or a resolution to refer something to the voters? Do you want us to do this or that? Whether or not we'll do it is another matter. But a specific, no, I've seen that, but I've seen that. That is not a specific ask. You could ask Ann Barkis how to do this, and that means in person, you know, a relationship, say, this is what we would like you to carry or do, and this is why, and this is the empirical evidence that backs it up, and this is this is the bipartisan that we're going to strive to achieve to make this happen. So ask us, and then we'll let you know whether or not we're going to do it.
Okay.
Or we'll try.
Senator Kafalis, I think that's excellent advice. I think we hear that clearly, and we will work. It's guidance on how to work on our legislative agenda and the messaging we provide, and I think we've heard that message and we'll work on it. So once again, thank you very much. I had a request from a board member that we allow another 5-minute break so that everybody can stand up and we can kind of say our goodbyes to you on your way out. So with that 5 minutes, we'll start up in 9:06.
Do you guys still have to go from that board meeting?
Yeah.
I know. Well, it's getting treated. Well, no.
All right, how about a 1-minute warning?
Christoph, before you forget.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, it's 9:13. We're back in the room. As soon as I said 5-minute break, the superintendent laughed. I don't know if that. So just a pat on the back. That was great. I appreciate that every year. I know you guys know it too. So agenda item 8.0 is a statement in support of the legislation being presented by Representative Polis. And I believe, Kathy, you've got that statement? Okay.
So it's been on our board legislative agenda for years that we would love to have full funding, which is considered 40% of IDEA. And so the statement that we came up with is in support of the bill that Representative Polis, well, we want to look at the bill itself, but that Representative Polis will put forward next week. And basically, it's going to take IDEA up to 40% over a 5-year period. And I guess the money will come out of the defense budget. So here is a statement that we put together that we're hoping that the board would approve. So I guess I move that the board approve the statement, which reads, "The Poudre School District Board of Education strongly supports increasing IDEA funding to 40% as originally agreed in 1975 from the current 16%. Districts have long been forced to spend general education dollars to support unfunded mandates to the detriment of their ability to provide an adequate education to all students. We are excited at the prospect that Congress will fulfill this promise." That's it.
Do I get a second for that? Rob.
Yeah.
And a comment as well, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
I think this is a very good statement in support. I want to be clear, just to follow on a couple of things that Kathy mentioned. One of them is that the proposal, as I understand it from the information we were provided today, is to take the funding that was proposed by, I think, the House, it is, right, to fund even more than the president asked for in terms of an increase in terms of defense, right? To not increase defense quite as much, but to take some of that money and put it at IDEA. So it's not decreasing our defense funding, but not increasing it even more than the president had already asked for. So I just want to be clear for the constituents who may be watching that that's what's going on there. And the other thing is that, as Kathy points out, we definitely are in support of full promised IDEA funding, and we haven't seen the actual text of the bill yet, and so that's why the statement is formulated the way it is. But based on the materials, we fully expect, based on the materials we've seen today, we fully expect the bill is going to be one we'd want to get behind. And as soon as we have that full text, we'll be following up on that. So thank you.
Are there any other comments? Kristen?
I did. There we go. Is that better? All right, there we go. All right. Let me know if this is not the appropriate place or time to ask this, but if we do go ahead and vote to have this statement, is it something that we could then put on the website, the Board of Education website, that we have this statement, put the statement out there, and maybe possibly also have a link to where you can tell your story to Jared Polis, so students and educators and parents might be able to, hit that and support that, with the board in support, however we wanted to, write that or term that, but if that's something we could possibly do.
So first off, that was a great question. And it sounds like, or it looks like we're getting nods of the head from Danielle. So if that's what the board would want, we could definitely get that done. So sounds good. Okay, any other comments before we go to a vote on that? Okay, let's do a roll call.
Nate. Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Susan. Aye.
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 All right, excellent. So you can go back with that excellent news to Representative Polis. You're welcome. All right, the agenda item 9 would be agenda planning. So are there items that we'd like to discuss tonight regarding the agenda moving forward? And bear in mind, I think we'll have time at the retreat as well. But Kathy, did you have something?
Okay, I'm just going to say something totally off topic on this topic. I wanted to say thank you to Kyla Davis for being our Assistant Board Secretary for the last year, because this is her last meeting with us. And I would like to welcome Valerie Stoddard as being our new Assistant Board Secretary. Thank you and welcome. And thank you, ladies, for all the work you do. Okay, so it's not really an agenda item. I apologize.
We don't need to add that to one of our meetings, full commentary. Okay. Anything else on this subject for today? Nate, no? Okay. All right. Well, with that, we're on to item 10.0, which is adjournment at 9:19 p.m.